Welcome to tonight's People School class. We're going to continue the study by Joseph Stalin on Mastering Bolshevism. You can get the copy of the book at New Outlook Publishers, and it's on the party website under the store.
We're starting with concluding speech, question 7. I had in view the question of the formal and heartless bureaucratic attitude of some of our party comrades toward the fate of individual party members, toward the question of expelling members from the party, or the question of restoring the rights of party membership to those who have been expelled. The fact is that some of our party leaders suffer from lack of attention to the people, to the party members, to workers. Furthermore, they do not study the party members, do not know what is close to their hearts, and how they are growing, and do not know workers in general. They have, therefore, not an individual approach to party members, to party workers. And just because they have not an individual approach when appraising party members and party workers, they usually act at random, either praising them wholesale, without measure, or crushing them, also wholesale and without measure, expelling thousands and tens of thousands from the party. Such leaders try, in general, to think in tens of thousands, not to worry about quote-unquote units, about individual party members, about their fate. They think it is a mere bagatelle to expel thousands and tens of thousands of people from the party, comforting themselves by the fact that our party is 2 million strong, and that tens of thousands of people expelled cannot change anything in the position of the party. But only people who in essence are profoundly anti-party can have such an approach to members of the party. As the result of such a heartless attitude toward people, toward party members and party workers, discontent and bitterness are artificially created in a section of the party, while the Trotskyite double dealers seize hold of such embittered comrades and skillfully drag after themselves into the morass of Trotskyite wrecking. The Trotskyites, by themselves, were never a big force in our party. Call to mind the last discussion of Trotskyism. In our party in 1927, this was a genuine party referendum. Out of 850,000 party members, 730,000 members voted at that time. Among them, 724,000 members voted for the Bolsheviks, for the Central Committee of the party, against the Trotskyites, and 4,000 party members, or about 0.5%, voted for the Trotskyites, while 2,600 members of the party refrained from voting. At this time, we will stop for questions.
I wonder if anybody felt like this during the time when Yeltsin was in the Supreme Soviet, was considered a whistleblower, but what he was doing is condemning as many good communists as he could by whatever infraction he could come up with. So I think even in that counter-revolution, that was happening.
Are there any examples of one of these mass purges that Stalin would consider to be excessive and would have been opposed to?
In terms of the quote-unquote purges, we talked about this extensively at the last class. Yezhov and Yagoda, specifically Yezhov, had said that he tried to kill as many people as possible to make Stalin look bad. So in a sense, we could say that we might be opposed to the killings that Yezhov committed that were excessive in the sense that he was trying to kill as many people as possible to make Stalin look bad. Yezhov, being the awful person that he is, decided not to name any of these people. So we sadly don't know who the innocent people were. So we can't say for sure exactly which quote-unquote purge it was that we would want to come out against. So it would be wrong of us to say, well, we're against this purge or we're against that purge. It would be more correct to say we are against the excesses of Yezhov.
In the mainstream bourgeois academia, Stalin is characterized as a bureaucrat. Tell me how a bureaucrat is telling us here in this speech. He's criticizing people with a, quote, formal and heartless bureaucratic attitude. It doesn't line up when you look at the direct speeches and texts from him. Specifically on the topic of bureaucracy, this is something he was railing against through his entire career, and this was kind of an impetus for the new draft constitution as well, which was widely celebrated.
The ones who push that Stalin was a bureaucrat are the Trotskyites. Look through all the work that Trotsky was involved with. That's their main thing, that the Stalinists were bureaucrats, when in reality, Stalin was very much against bureaucracy, and it's in all of his writings, as the comrade just said.
Lenin criticized Trotsky for being too bureaucratic, ironically. And even more ironically, Stalin led the purge against the bureaucrats.
In what situations would it make sense to purge or expel comrades?
That's a good question, because I hear it among the young people in our party today. They're very quick. They like the idea, to the gulag. Can't believe it, but that's what comes out of their mouth. All the worst stereotypes that has been attributed to the Bolshevik revolutionaries, the younger people think is a positive thing, and it's not. It's the negative stereotypes of what Lenin and Stalin represented. But remember, in every revolution, there are different characters who play different parts. The French Revolution, Girondists, and the Jacobins. In the American Revolution in 1776, there were individuals who were very hard on those who supported the king. And they lost everything, and they were tarred and feathered, which meant they were killed. The tar closes up the pores in your body, and you actually suffocate. So we have that in every revolution, and there's the extreme elements of it. Question about who should be, Stalin makes it clear those who are anti-Soviet, who work with foreign entities to bring down the Soviet Union. And that's where Bukharin, Trotsky come in, and we'll talk about it another time, maybe not tonight, what their goal was according to the transcripts.
We also, in the party constitution, have outlined the few cases in which somebody can be immediately expelled. And it's only a few cases. It's being a saboteur to the party, being an informant, those sorts of things. You can go look at the party constitution under discipline to find out what those are.
I gather from this reading, the people that were being expelled from the party, they were expelled saying that they were all Trotskyites, and that Stalin was saying Trotskyites have never been a big force in our party. Am I correct on that?
The people that were joined together with the Bloc of Four, BLOC, the bloc of the right and the left, and that was Zinoviev, Kamenev, Trotsky. It was more than just Trotsky and the followers of Trotsky. They were only a minority. But remember, they were the followers of Bukharin. And people, for whatever reason, do not go into Bukharin. In my opinion, Bukharin is alive and well today and active inside the communist movement. But nobody talks about it anymore for whatever reason. So it was a block. It wasn't just one person, comrade. So the Trotskyites themselves were a small minority after that vote that they had at the meeting that was mentioned in the text.
There were 123,000 members who did not participate in the voting. They did not participate either because they were away from home or because their shift was at work when the vote was taken. If, to the 4,000 who voted for the Trotskyites, we had all those who refrained from voting on the assumption that they also sympathized with the Trotskyites, and if to this total we add not 0.5% of those who did not take part in the voting, as should be done by right, but 5% of those who did not participate, that is about 6,000 party members. We obtain about 12,000 party members who sympathized with Trotskyism to some extent or other. Here you see the total forces of the Trotskyite gentlemen. Add to this the fact that many out of this number became disillusioned with Trotskyism and left it, and you get a conception of the insignificance of the Trotskyite forces. And if, in spite of this, the Trotskyite wreckers nevertheless have some reserves or other around our party, it is because the incorrect policy of some of our comrades on the question of expulsion from the party and reinstatement of expelled people, the heartless attitude of some of our comrades toward the fate of individual party members and individual party workers, artificially engender a number of discontented and embittered people, and thus create these reserves for the Trotskyites. A large number are expelled for so-called passivity. What is passivity? It is considered, we discover, that if a member of the party has not mastered the party program, he is, quote-unquote, passive and due for expulsion. But this is not right, comrades. The statutes of our party cannot be interpreted so pedantically. To master the party program, one needs to be a real Marxist, a tested and theoretically trained Marxist. I do not know whether many party members will be found by us in the party who have already mastered our program, have become genuine Marxists, theoretically trained and tried. If we were to go further along this path, we should have to leave only intellectuals and learned people in general in the party. Who wants such a party? We have the Leninist formula about party membership, which is verified and has stood all tests. According to this formula, a party member is one who accepts the party program, pays membership dues, and works in one of its organizations. That's actually exactly what we require, is somebody who pays party dues and works in one of our organizations. We follow the Soviet model, which I think is very interesting. With that, we'll be opening up to questions.
This is a very important section of Comrade Stalin's address to the delegates to this party meeting. Why do I say that? Because it's unfortunate that I think many people, especially new people to the party, don't understand what it means to get expelled. I think they have a view that people get expelled for every little thing. And that's not the case. Comrade Stalin makes it clear here. He uses the term passivity. So he says people that come to us are not really Marxists yet. They want to be Marxists. I think the way Gus Hall called it, they want to be. They want to be Marxists. They want to be Communist Party members. But they really don't know what it is to be a party member. And you can't blame them because they weren't told or taught this outside of the party. So it's important that we be more understanding, and Comrade Stalin will go into it at further length, that we be more understanding of why people who are new to the party don't take on much activity in the beginning.
One thing I really like about this particular reading is that it helps to dispel a lot of the myths about Comrade Stalin. There's a lot of these bourgeois myths that Comrade Stalin was an egomaniacal dictator who wanted to control everything. He wanted to expel everybody from the party. He wanted to have all these great purges and stuff. Stalin wasn't a fan of the purges. Stalin signed many of the warrants that came forward through the purges because he trusted his officers. But when it turned out that his chief officer, Yezhov, was lying to him, Yezhov was tried and executed. It turned out Yezhov was a spy for the Nazis. Yezhov admitted to executing as many people as possible, expelling as many people as possible from the party, just to make Stalin look bad. That's something we have to consider while reading this.
I think that these two passages that we read do a really good job of dispelling the myths that we hear about Stalin quite often. Like if we got Lenin's way, Trotsky would have been the leader, which is super false, just so false, because we already see that there's only 4,000 people out of millions that would have supported Trotsky. And then we also see Stalin being very, very against this purge mentality, fighting against it, saying that we have to keep people in the party, even if they're passive. We don't need people that are just going to work their butts off every single day. We need everyone together doing this stuff. So I think it's just a really good job of dispelling a lot of these myths.
You have people who want to oust others for not working enough. You have Stalin pushing up against this. But at the same time, Stalin's also written that we have to exhibit self-criticism. So it's a balance between how do you make sure that your fellow comrades are doing the work and that they're focused on the mission of communism, and at the same time willing to give others patience who are not involved in these things to become involved and become more learned in the subject. So it's a tough job. It's a double-edged sword. And I think Stalin understood that.
I was actually listening to a podcast episode about Stalin today, and they had mentioned, especially around the time of the purges, how Stalin put a 4-month class to all the cadres so that they could effectively fight against the opportunism that might arise from the purges. That got me thinking, especially in context of what was going on around that time, and thinking about how, especially being part of the party, it might be easy to become complacent in what you're doing, especially if you've been in the party for so long. I could see that happening. Having something to center yourself when it comes to the party and doing the work.
The idea that, as Comrade Stalin says, that one could be expelled from the party if he is passive sounds, to me, bureaucratic and or revisionist. And I guess the reason I say that is because nowhere in the U.S.S.R's constitution does it mention that that is to be done, or for that matter, in our own party's constitution. So I wonder where that idea of being expelled for passivity even came from in the first place.
Comrade Stalin is attacking those who are saying that people should be expelled from a Leninist party because they're passive. He's not agreeing with that. He's attacking it. Where did it come from? I can't answer that. Maybe somebody else knows. But it came along someplace before that period. It could have been during the period when they were out of state power. That could have been during that period when they were fighting the Tsar in the first revolution of March, 1917. That was the first revolution. The Kerensky people took over. That could have been in the party at that time, and it probably was. But I agree that whether it's bureaucratic or dogmatic or whatever, Comrade Stalin's saying it's an incorrect policy.
For the people that were wrongfully expelled, were they allowed to come back?
Yes, he mentions that there. It was a program where people are allowed to come back. We have the same thing in our party. Basically, in Vietnam, after the revolution, 1975, when they won, they had re-education schools where people had a chance to come back into good light by being re-educated. The bourgeoisie doesn't like that term. They think that term means you're being brainwashed. But when you were following the old regime of Saigon and the U.S. interference, you were not brainwashed. This is the thesis. But you're brainwashed when the communists and socialists take power. Then you're brainwashed. You figure it out, because I can't.
The thing about this document is that it lays to rest all of the lies that are said about Stalin, including the cult of personality, things like that. It shows that Stalin was not purging people. The people around him were purging people. Like Comrade said, people were being expelled by Yezhov. Yezhov was a spy for the Germans, and he was in a very important, trusted position. And so it shows to us that even under the best conditions, mistakes can be made and expulsions can take place for people that are innocent. But what it shows also is that people that are learning about Marxism were considered passive simply because they were learning.
This is a brilliant work to look at people who are maybe on the fence or something or have bad vibes when it comes to Stalin. Probably about 15, 20 years ago when I was really getting interested in socialism, there was like a big-headedness about it. It's like, oh, you got to read all this theory and blah, blah, blah before you can be considered a real socialist. Well, here it is in writing. Stalin says basically that's not true. If you're out there doing the work for the party, then you are a socialist. I do have a question about how he said some people might be expelled, and you mentioned that people are expelled and they can be brought back in, what that would entail as in proving that they're a true Marxist or what have you. But in any case, it just kind of shows that it is absolutely not the case that only intellectuals should be in the party, and he explicitly says no to that, and that's something I think can really bring in working class people who might be like I was 15 years ago.
I think that speaking about not purging people from the party unless truly necessary, it speaks to how it's so necessary to be inclusive, so as to create a movement rooted and based with the masses, because a true revolutionary party cannot be anything other than that.
Thank you, Comrade.
The myths about Stalin, very specifically the idea that Stalin wanted to expel everyone from the party. He was expelling everybody. Very clearly here, Stalin did not want to expel people. He was very upset at the amount of people who were being expelled from the party. He was upset at the people who were doing all of the expulsions.
All right, we're going to go back to the reading.
Note that Lenin's formula does not speak about mastering the program, but of accepting the program. These are two entirely different things. There is no need to prove Lenin was right here and not our other party comrades who vainly mouthed about mastering the program. It is obvious by itself. If the party took the standpoint that the party members can be only those comrades who have already mastered the program and have become theoretically trained Marxists, it would not have formed thousands of party circles in the party, hundreds of party schools, where the party members are taught Marxism and are helped to master our program. It is quite clear that if the party organizes schools and circles among the party members, it is because it knows that the party members have not yet succeeded in mastering the party program, have not yet succeeded in becoming theoretically trained Marxists. Consequently, To correct our policy on the question of membership of the party and expulsion from the party, it is necessary to put an end to the present blockheaded interpretation of the question of passivity. But we have still another error in this field. The fact is that our comrades do not recognize the mean between two extremes. It is sufficient for a worker, a party member, to commit some small offense, to be late 2 or 3 times at a party meeting, not to pay membership dues for some reason or other, and in a flash, he is thrown out of the party. No interest is taken to the degree of his offense, the cause of his non-appearance at the meeting, the cause of the non-payment of membership dues. The bureaucracy of this is simply unparalleled. It is not difficult to understand that, precisely as a result of such a heartless policy, splendid, skilled workers, excellent Stakhanovites, have been thrown out of the party. And was it impossible, before expelling them from the party, to give a warning? And if this had no effect, to censure them, or administer a reprimand? And if this had no effect, to set a period for reformation, or in the extreme case, to reduce to the position of a candidate, but not expel them with a sweep of the hand from the party? Of course it was possible. But this requires an attentive attitude to people, to the party members, to the fact of party membership. And this is exactly what some of our comrades lack. It is high time to put a stop to this outrageous practice, comrades.
Anybody have a question on what was just read?
What he said about understanding that the party members don't come in knowing everything, and that's why they have the schools and the stuff like that, explain how important to someone like me that is, because that for a long time kept me from joining a party because I was worried I just didn't know enough because I hadn't had the time to do the reading beforehand. But finding out that our party did do schooling made me feel comfortable and understand that, like, you guys understood I wasn't coming in having read all of the literature and all of the theory. So I think remembering that as a party that a lot of times new members and even members who've been around a little while maybe haven't read as much theory as someone else has is just a good way to look at it and thing to remember.
It doesn't matter how much you know or don't know, as long as you're willing to learn about the party program, as long as you're willing to learn about Marxism-Leninism and you accept that. The main thing is, do you accept the 8 points of unity? Something Angelo told me, interviewing people, was make sure people agree with at least 80% of the 8 points of unity. Never told me, make sure that they've mastered the party program. He said, ask them if they've read the party constitution. He didn't say, make sure that they've memorized it. That was never a stipulation. He said, read the 8 points of unity to them if they haven't read them already. He didn't say that they had to have read them already.
This idea that you have to come into the party and be this master, be this prophet, it's obviously preposterous, and Stalin attacks it as such. In the section before, he's talking about, if we were to go further along with this path, we should have only a party of intellectuals and learned people who want such a party. I feel like that sums up the point that was just made. People on this phone call, at least. That's clearly not where their heads are at. They're committed to scientific socialism, Marxism-Leninism. They're not interested in any sort of intellectual Olympics or any sort of baseline. To enter the party, you have to be an intellectual.
This last part, I agree, was the most interesting thing I've read, I think, so far from Stalin, because of how blunt he was in pointing out this incredible bureaucracy. And he gave an example, a hypothetical member of the party who was maybe late to a meeting or forgot to pay a due, and instead of giving him a warning or going through some sort of reprimand, they just straight out expel the comrade from the party. So my question is, what was the party's response to what Stalin wrote here? Did they ever try and change their policy on expelling members, or did they just ignore it?
That's a very good question, comrade. Really a good question. I don't know the answer to that. That's a very good question. Does anybody know more information? I would assume, and that's a bad thing to assume, I would assume that being that he was the General Secretary and that this doesn't just come out from him, it was discussed at the Politburo meeting, and therefore he had the Politburo with him on this, that it did affect changes on a positive way. But if anybody has any other answer or analysis, we're open to it.
About the Soviet Constitution, I know that the Soviet Constitution was followed very strictly after Stalin started criticizing people for not following it more closely. So going off that, I wouldn't say we can assume, but we can gather that the most likely scenario is that that would be the case.
I think you're correct. It says that this speech was given March 3rd, 1937. That was after the Constitution. And the Constitution was very, very correct in what it said. It was the first time it put into print a lot of the benefits of socialism that they built from 1922 to 1936. We could only use the past as a barometer that it was probably carried out.
One of the characters I really fail to understand is Bukharin. He was sort of a master Marxist at one point, but I don't know what happened to him.
Bukharin, along with Trotsky and Zinoviev and all the others, they were caught with evidence, and they admitted this. And they could have denied it very easily. In fact, the American ambassador was at the trials. Davies, American Ambassador Davies, was at these trials, and he was a trial lawyer, and they were the most fair, democratic trials he's ever seen. Nobody was forced. They could have said their innocence, but they didn't, because I believe strongly that, especially Bukharin, I believe Bukharin was a loyal Bolshevik and got caught up with the wrong Bolsheviks and followed their advice and thinking that he could save what they wanted to build in Russia in 1917. He wanted to save it by having an agreement that the Soviet Union was going to be divided, I don't know if people know this, into three sections. One section was going to be under the occupation of the Germans, like they did in France, like they did in Yugoslavia, like they did in many countries. A section would be occupied, another section would be a so-called free state allied with the Germans, and another one was going to be another free state. So Bukharin was going to be the head of one of those, and in that section he would carry out what he thinks the revolution should have been like before they had socialist construction. He was opposed to socialist construction. Bukharin was the one who was the father of the new economic policy, and everybody should know what that is. It's current today in some communist movements, and Bukharin was the father of that. So I believe he was one of those, and I've heard this analysis from other places. Lenin talked very good about Bukharin. He considered him a nice guy. He didn't talk good about Trotsky. He thought he was an intellectual snob, but he did talk well about Bukharin.
Stalin speaks of being more attentive to party members. Is there any specific ways that we could or should be more attentive for party members?
Oh, yeah. Our motto has been passion for our ideology and compassion for our comrades. And compassion is what's lacking in the communist movement, in this country especially. They take the stereotype of a robot for a revolutionary and no compassion. If you noticed, if you've seen the movie Reds, Warren Beatty plays the part of John Reed. And John Reed asked the Comintern if he can be relieved and go see his wife, because he hasn't seen his wife in almost a year or maybe more. And Zinoviev, who was the head of the Comintern in the movie, which is based on a lot of reality, was very hard-nosed. And he said, I haven't seen my family in a year. Why should you see yours? The revolution comes first. Well, that kind of attitude drives a certain number of people away from us, not towards us. And I think our motto, it comes straight from this idea of what Comrade Stalin said. Passion in our beliefs and our ideology, but compassion for the people we work with, our comrades. And if you notice, all of our meetings, comrade, end in good and welfare. What do you think that's about? Good and welfare is we want to know in your personal life what happened in the last weeks that we have not been in contact with you. Has any good things happened to you? Any bad things? We want to know. We're concerned. We have empathy.
Che Guevara said, a communist must be guided by a great sense of love.
I was curious as to what a Stakhanovite might be.
They were the workers who in the West have sometimes been referred to as the shock workers in the Soviet Union, and they were specifically named after a coal miner in the Soviet Union named Alexei Stakhanov.
Stakhanovites were workers who were the most exemplary workers. On Saturday, which was a day off for the Soviet worker, when everyone else is off, that comrade works on a Saturday and doesn't get paid. Did an extra shift or two. They went into the countryside and worked in the fields. They put a whole day in without getting paid. And his labor is donated so that the 5-year plan can be completed. And of course, whatever money the state made went right back into the coffers of the state. People should understand, which they don't, that under socialism, you have a profit. Not a profit motive. There's a difference. But you have a profit. There's so many hours that's put in to making a car. So many labor hours. When you sell that car to a worker, you sell it at another price. There's a difference between the two, and it's called profit. That goes back into the Soviet government. That's why you had subsidized housing, which was cheap housing. That's why you had subsidized medical care, health care, education, vacations for a month. Transportation was cheap. The reason is it was all subsidized. And it was subsidized by the profits that the Soviet people made when they produced a product, whether it was a radio, a TV, or a car. Stakhanovites were those who saved even more money because they didn't get paid at all. That's what a Stakhanovite is. In the Soviet Union, when I was there, it was still popular. And you're correct. It's named after an exemplary worker in the coal mine. It's named after him, his last name. But that's what the Stakhanovite is. It's basically labor given to the state so that they could go to achieve their 5-year plan. I think our party is the best. Why? Because our party is following Comrade Stalin to the T. Our party is following Comrade Lenin to the T. We have not revised anything. We have not thrown Comrade Stalin under the bus. We have not put him in a closet and locked the door the way the old CP has. We mention him proudly. Unlike Workers' World and PSL, they're ashamed of Comrade Stalin. Ask them what they think about Comrade Stalin. You don't believe what I'm saying, and they will tell you. They downgrade him, as if all this happened without Comrade Stalin. Victory of the Red Army over fascism, the success, 5-year plan, achieving that, all that happened. They never mention Comrade Stalin. Ask yourself a question, everyone on the phone. They come out of a Trotsky mold. And when you push them, they'll tell you. The best they're going to tell you is, we don't want to talk about that anymore because it happened such a long time ago. And it's history. And the young people don't know about history. And I ask them, well, your job, comrade, is to teach them history. They're not going to get it from the bourgeois textbooks. And that's the response I got from the PSL members. In fact, one of their leaders told me that. That's what he told me in New York in 1992. We're not going to talk about the Soviet Union ever again. Why? Because the young people are born after the Soviet Union. Is that a dialectical statement made by a communist? Anyway, that was my whole thing, that our party is really the closest to what the Bolsheviks were. I'm going to end it with this and open up. When a comrade says, I have to step down because things are going on in my life, we have to say, okay, comrade, take a leave of absence. Come back when you feel ready. Even though deep down we know they may never come back. But we're dealing with human beings that have problems and stress in their life, comrades. We don't tell them, oh, I'm sorry. If you step down, don't ever come back again. Like a lover that's spurned. Lover where they get angry. The love turns to hate all of a sudden because the other person wants out of the relationship. This is life. This is what happens. It's a relationship we're in, comrades. And if people, for whatever reason, cannot fulfill that relationship, we cannot force them to stay in. We have to wish them the best of luck. And whenever we see them again, we see them again. That's the best we can do.
5. What does it mean to train cadres on the basis of their own mistakes? Lenin taught that one of the surest means of correctly training and educating party cadres, of correctly training and educating the working class and the masses of the people, is to disclose conscientiously the mistakes of the party, to study the causes that have given rise to these mistakes, and to indicate the paths necessary for overcoming these mistakes. Lenin said, the attitude of a political party towards its own mistakes is one of the most important and surest criteria of the seriousness of the party and of how it fulfills in practice its obligations towards its class and towards the masses of working people. To admit a mistake openly, to disclose its reasons, to analyze the conditions which gave rise to it, to study attentively the means of correcting it, these are the signs of a serious party. This means the performance of its duties. This means educating and training the class and, subsequently, the masses. This means that the Bolsheviks are in duty bound not to gloss over their mistakes, not to dodge the question of their mistakes, as often happens with us, but honestly and openly admit to their mistakes. Honestly and openly indicate the way of correcting these mistakes, honestly and openly to correct them. I would not say that many of our comrades undertake this business with satisfaction, but if the Bolsheviks really wish to be Bolsheviks, they must find sufficient manliness in themselves openly to admit their mistakes, to reveal their causes, to indicate the way of correcting them, and thereby to give the party cadres correct training and correct political education. For it is only on this path, only by open and honest self-criticism, that Bolshevik cadres really can be educated, that real Bolshevik leaders can be educated.
Being able to learn and understand self-crit has allowed me to overall become a lot more disciplined as I'm studying. A lot of us have come to this party not knowing everything, I myself included, and I have learned more than I could have really wrapped my head around before joining the party, and a part of that is recognizing and practicing self-critique. Don't be afraid to apply it to yourself, as it's going to make you a better Bolshevik.
When it comes to self-criticism, I definitely feel like it's probably one of the more important things to do while developing, because when it comes to scientific socialism, it's impossible to have a science without criticism and analysis. And in the practice of political work, people are so used to people just sidestepping and dodging their mistakes and repeating them over and over again, that any people's movement, any movement for the working class, if we don't own up to our mistakes and we don't constantly try to improve, people will sniff that out from a mile away and they'll think that we're just one of the dozens of other opportunist groups that have popped up.
Comrades, this is an important section. All parties that consider themselves Leninist parties go through this. We are a relatively new party. We consider ourselves part of the communist history that started in 1919 in Chicago. But in reality, we had to start all over again in, I would say, 2009 or 10, when many of us left the old party, the old CP. We were told that we had to follow their line, which was anti-Sovietism. That's what their line was. After 2000, that was their line. And if we continue to praise the Soviet Union, then we would be in different step with the rest of the party. So they dropped us. That's what they did, in case anybody wants to know. They dropped us, and we didn't hear from our own party leaders anymore, or the officers. So we had to form a new party, and this is history for people. We formed a pre-party formation. Lenin calls it a pre-party, before we have a party, pre-party formation, and it was called the NCC, National Council of Communists, USA. 2015, on May Day, we set up our first party, and there were 25 people at the time. Only 24 voted to form a new party, and one, who was a hojist at the time, voted against forming a new party. He said we need to do more studying. We didn't need a party yet. And then we had our first Congress, 2016, and now we're in 2021. We're a new party, comrades. We're new. And people have to understand that we're going to make mistakes. And the cadre should be helping us, not leaving us alone when we make mistakes, not running out the door. They should be with us to help correct these mistakes. We have to learn from our mistakes. And we need as many cadre as possible to help us learn from mistakes. That's why we need cadre.
Two examples will illustrate the correctness of Lenin's thesis. Let us take as one example our mistakes connected with the building up of the collective farms. You remember, I imagine, the year 1930, when our party comrades thought of solving the very complicated question of transferring the peasantry to the building of collective farms in some 3 to 4 months, and when the Central Committee of the party found itself compelled to put a check upon comrades who were being carried away. This was one of the most dangerous periods in the life of our party. The mistake lay in this, that our party comrades forgot the voluntary character of the building of collective farms, forgot that the peasants must not be transferred to the collective farm path by administrative pressure, forgot that the building of collective farms required not several months, but several years of careful and well-planned work. They forgot all this, and did not want to admit their mistakes. You remember, I imagine, that the directions of the Central Committee regarding dizziness from success, and that our comrades in the localities should not leap ahead, ignoring the actual state of affairs, were met with hostility. But this did not prevent the Central Committee from going against the stream and turning our party comrades onto the right road. Well then, it is now clear to everybody that the party achieved what it wanted by turning our party comrades onto the right road. We now have tens of thousands of splendid peasant cadres engaged in the building of collective farms, and in their leadership, these cadres grew up and were trained on the basis of the mistakes of 1930. But we would not now have had these cadres had not the party then recognized these mistakes and corrected them in time.
There are different types of agriculture. It's important that everybody knows this. There was the collective farm. That was one. The second one was a higher level, more sophisticated. It was called the state farm. And the state farms were different. They were not under the control of a village, a collective in a village, but actually the state. So the people that ran the tractors, the people that planted the seeds, we were all state workers, all employed by the state. That's important for people to know. All employed by the state. On the state farms, they were so large, very similar to agribusinesses in the United States, that size. But instead of being privately owned, It was owned by the government, the state. And they had 50 or 60 tractors on those farms. And they used to have them at a station. It's called a tractor station. And so those tractors were also shared or rented out by the collective farmers and also by the people on the state farms.
Stalin briefly mentioned people becoming dizzy with success, and his speech, Dizzy with Success, talks about how comrades in the party need to be willing to correct mistakes amongst themselves. They need to be willing to self-criticize, and they need to watch out for getting caught up in grandiose ideas, and they need to watch out for getting caught up in the dizziness of success. We can get caught up in the euphoria of success coming quickly, and then we get disheartened if it doesn't happen again the next time, and people will fall out. So it's something very important to remember, and it's a great speech to read. It's not that long. I think it's 8 pages.
The other example is from the field of industrial construction. I have in mind our mistakes at the Shakti wrecking period. Our mistakes lay in the fact that we did not take into account all the dangers of the technical backwardness of our cadres in industry, that we put up with this backwardness and thought of developing socialist industrial construction on a wide scale with the inimically inclined specialists, dooming our economic cadres to play the part of poor commissars for the bourgeois specialists. You remember, I imagine, how unwilling our economic cadres were to recognize their mistakes at the time, how unwilling they were to recognize their own technical backwardness, and with what difficulty they assimilated the slogan master technique. Well, then, the facts go to show that the slogan master technique had its effects and produced its good results. We now have tens and hundreds of thousands of splendid Bolshevik economic cadres who have already mastered a technique and are advancing our industry. But we would not now have these cadres had the party not risen to the occasion in the face of the obduracy of the business executives who did not want to admit their technical backwardness, had not the party then recognized its mistakes and corrected them in time. Some comrades say that it is not advisable to speak openly of one's mistakes, since the admission of one's mistakes may be construed by our enemies as weakness and may be utilized by them. This is rubbish, comrades. Downright rubbish. The open recognition of our mistakes and their honest rectification can, on the contrary, only strengthen the party, raise its authority in the eyes of the workers, peasants, and working intellectuals, and increase the strength and power of our state. And this is the main thing. As long as we have the workers, peasants, and working intellectuals with us, all the rest will settle itself. Other comrades say that the open admission of our mistakes can lead not to training and consolidating our cadres, but to weakening and disconcerting them, that we must spare and take care of our cadres, that we must spare their self-esteem and tranquility. To this end, they propose to slur over the mistakes of our comrades, to weaken the vigor and the criticism, still better to disregard these mistakes. Such a line is not only fundamentally incorrect, but also dangerous in the highest degree. Dangerous, first and foremost, for the cadres whom they want to spare and take care of. To spare and preserve cadres by slurring over their mistakes means certainly to ruin these very cadres. We would surely have ruined our collective farm Bolshevik cadres had we not revealed the mistakes of the year 1930 and had we not trained them on the basis of these mistakes. We would certainly have ruined our industrial Bolshevik cadres had we not revealed the mistakes of our comrades in the Shakti wrecking period, and had we not trained our industrial cadres on the basis of these mistakes. He who expects to spare the self-esteem of our cadres by slurring over their mistakes ruins both the cadres and their self-esteem, for by slurring over their mistakes, he facilitates the repetition of new and perhaps more serious mistakes, which, one may presume, will lead to the complete downfall of the cadres to the detriment of their self-esteem and tranquility.
In relation to Deng Xiaoping, one of the reforms he made was creating a dialogue structure that was a place for different people in different layers of the government to meet and to self-criticize, but also criticize people above them, and whether that had any relationship to what Stalin was talking about in the second half of the reading.
Whatever our differences, some of us have, with the party in China on their economic situation, ideologically, I think a lot of times they're right on the mark. I think that the current Chinese government takes what Mao said, I don't know if you know this, but during the Mao time, which was my time, in the 60s, talked about criticism and self-criticism. And that was very big. In fact, when I joined the movement, I thought it was Mao. I didn't even know it was originally Lenin and Stalin who talked about criticism and self-criticism. So it's throughout the communist movement.
Benito Mussolini started off his political career as a socialist and a labor organizer before turning traitor for the capitalists and big industrialists.
That's true.
When Stalin is saying cadre, when talking about farmers and technicians, does he mean actual party members doing this work, or was that like more of a general term for like the citizens or non-party members?
He was talking about party members within the field. Every time he used the word cadre, he means party members.
This reading tonight especially, as it goes through the very tumultuous period of the purges, highlights the situation that our party has faced in the past and will continue to face in the future. And it reminds us that this situation is not unique. The CPSU faced this, the CPC faces this, the Cuban Communist Party faces this. We have to remain true in what we believe and our faith in the party, knowing that, as Stalin said, mountains of lies will be heaped upon us, but the winds of history will sweep them away. And I just want to encourage all the comrades to remain true and steadfast in the party and its leadership.
We spoke a lot about self-criticism, and I'm wondering how we defend against opportunists who would use the concept of self-criticism to steer away from the goals of socialism, because I see that as a problem that happened late in the Soviet Union with Gorbachev in that era, where they were identifying problems that they saw, but they weren't really problems, and then they weren't identifying real problems. So it was kind of a perversion of self-criticism, a lot of revisionism that. So how do we defend against that?
That was my baptism into being pro-Stalin, was the Gorbachev years. The CPUSA, which I had been a member of for 40 years, completely supported perestroika, which means in Russian, restructuring. What perestroika did was take away central planning. I want people to know this. Whenever they take away central planning, they're getting away from what Lenin is talking about. And they had one factory compete with another factory down the block. They both made women's shoes. And each factory manager would get more money if his factory sold more shoes. Listen to this. Than the other factory who sold shoes. That takes away completely from the idea of central planning, where they made shoes because the people needed shoes, not competing one against the other. My club in Staten Island, of 25 members, which is a lot in conservative Staten Island, was on record against perestroika. And the party leadership came to us and told us there is no dissent in the party over perestroika. And I knew that wasn't true. I had been the club chair at the time. And they basically told us that if we didn't like the way things were going, we were going to be expelled. So this idea of Gorbachev, perestroika, and glasnost. Glasnost was the term which meant you can criticize anything that happened in the Soviet Union from 1919 onward, including the Stalin years. And you're correct. It was used, abused by the anti-Soviet forces, the pro-bourgeois forces, in order to attack in the press every day Soviet history. I don't know how we can solve that, but that's what happened.
I find this to be really inspirational and a great piece. I think such a huge problem with our current system of politics, and I think a lot of people see it, whether or not they realize it. We live in a world that is so devoid of self-criticism in almost every single regard, and it's infuriating when you could just admit that this was terrible or whatever. And I think that what makes us communists and how we are different is that we have to look at our mistakes and our shortcomings in the face, that we have to deal with them. We can't just brush them under the rug as the way the bourgeois do, and then do this rainbow imperialism, this face of freedom on top of just bloodshed and carnage.
The comrade who mentioned how can we stop this bastardization of self-crit conversation Angela and I just had. You got to have a strong base of historical materialism. And what I said was basically, this is the time. This is the time to start bringing comrades in, because everything that's going on with COVID, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, this is the number one time that people are going to be getting in here. And he said, no, you're not right. It's not the number one time. The number one time was in the 30s. And this was a time that you had the Great Depression going on, and you had no social safety net whatsoever. Even what we have today, we have Social Security and whatnot. So I think if people have a good grasp of historical materialism, know history, which obviously Angelo does since he was a history teacher, I think this is a good way to combat things like that. That thing about glasnost, and that's in itself a fake historical materialism if you're saying just straight from 1919 to a certain time. I wanted to bring that up as a way to fight against fake self-crit and things like that.
In answer to the question there, I don't think self-crit is just about putting yourself on blast. Self-crit should be a trial. Whether it's the self-trial by yourself or with peers, it's not just about saying, look how horrible everything is, look at how this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. It's about going into an in-depth view on what happened, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad and what's good. And you got to take both with it and then analyze how to improve from there. You know, and that's how you defend about it. You defend against fake self-criticism, is you in-depth analyze yourself, and you have your peers, your comrades analyze you as well. And only through that in-depth analysis can we then grow and defend against the very shallow, opportunist self-crit that I think we saw in the later years of the Soviet Union.
I was watching a documentary recently by CGTN about the poverty alleviation campaign in China, and it mentioned that, especially during the Cultural Revolution, the idea of criticism and self-criticism did kind of get distorted in the party. There was a lot of chaos going on from the right and the left, and there was a lot of instances where high-up members in the party used the criticism and self-criticism session as a cudgel to beat down the people that they wanted to beat down, etc. It wasn't being used in the disciplined way that we should be using it. And they mentioned that under the Deng Xiaoping administration, they actually codified this into a required meeting that every cadre has to attend every 6 months, and they have to come prepared with criticisms and self-criticisms. And so it's made it systematized. It seems to have been a positive thing for their party.
I think it's awesome that all the comrades on the call are understanding the importance of self-criticism, understanding the importance to not vulgarize it, as Stalin mentioned in his Pravda article written in 1928 against vulgarizing the slogan of self-criticism. As some of the comrades mentioned, very knowledgeable of them, Mao and the Gang of Four, they were vulgarizing self-criticism from the left in the 60s and the 70s during the Cultural Revolution. And it's funny, Jiang Qing, who was one of the leaders of the Gang of Four, actually had an encounter with Deng Xiaoping around that time in the 70s, where they were hailing an ocean liner as a great proletarian achievement. All this is a victory for the world revolution. And it was some out-of-dated ocean liner that Deng had rode on in, I think, the 10s or the 20s. And he mentioned that to him. And the Gang of Four couldn't even accept that material analysis, that measurement of where they actually stood as a form of self-criticism. We also need to defend against it from the right, like what Gorbachev did, perestroika, glasnost.
A piece from William Z. Foster's article on the struggle against revisionism, but he also had a short discussion on how mistakes in the party should be handled. So he says that political mistakes are serious matters and cannot be lightly passed over. In these times of crucial struggle against fascism, they involve the welfare, the liberties, and possibly even the lives of large masses of people. Leaders who make such mistakes must therefore be held strictly responsible. Consequently, the proposal as stated in the National Committee's resolution to refresh and strengthen the personnel of all responsible leading committees in the association is a pertinent one. He's talking about the Communist Political Association at the time. So he says the party must provide the best guarantees it can in its leadership that such a disastrous mistake shall not take place again. This does not signify, however, as some comrades assert, that the whole national leadership must be cleaned out. Such a leftist course would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Communist parties are not infallible, and even the best Marxists sometimes make mistakes. The distinction between communist parties and other parties of the people in this respect is that, armed with the science of Marxism-Leninism, the former make far fewer mistakes than any other group, and when they do commit errors, they frankly admit and correct them. Just a little while ago, Stalin stated that many serious errors had been made in the U.S.S.R. during the prosecution of the war. And in his famous speech on Mastering Bolshevism, delivered on March 3, 1937, when pointing out that the leadership of the party made serious errors, failing to recognize the danger of Trotskyism, he said, "How can it be explained that our leading comrades, who had a rich experience of struggle against every kind of anti-party and anti-Soviet trend, proved to be so blind and naive in this case that they were unable to recognize the real face of the enemies of the people, were unable to discern the wolves in sheep's clothing, were unable to tear the mask from them. They forgot Soviet power had conquered only 1/6 of the world, that 5/6 of the world is in possession of capitalist powers. They forgot that the Soviet Union is in conditions of capitalist encirclement. This was a very serious error, as all will agree, and in the most advanced communist party in the world. When errors are made by communist leaders, and our error was a serious one, it calls for a check over the leading forces, but this must not be interpreted as a signal for a reckless decimation of the party's leadership."
Comrade Felix Dzerzhinsky, he was in charge of much of the prosecution during the Red Terror, and he was given lists every day of people who were to be tried and then executed or let go. And one day he was given a list of people who had been tried and they were to be executed, and it was a list of Catholic priests. And he looked over the investigation more thoroughly. He did some investigating himself, and he said, "No, this is a mistake." And he looked into the persecution of the clergy, and he said, "We're going too hard on the clergy, and it is hurting our image with the people." And he said that unless there is substantial evidence against clergymen, that he would not execute another priest. That's one example. Another is referencing a class that we did before on Hungary, in which there were mistakes made by the leadership of Mátyás Rákosi. And what ended up happening is the leadership that came after him under a man named Imre Nagy, they decided to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What ended up happening was a civil war in Hungary. But luckily, people realized that the communists were correct. And afterwards, they decided to go with the correct path and just correct mistakes instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I've already listened to some of the PSMLS classes on YouTube, which entirely convinced me to join. I really appreciate the emphasis on learning and admitting that there's stuff that I don't know and that we all don't know. And I really like that a lot. I also really appreciate the emphasis on passion for our ideology and compassion for our comrades. I really, really appreciate, because I think the human touch, understanding we're all humans trying to live in a capitalist country, and how much that could really take a toll on us.
I found today's session very inspiring because I've heard things from Stalin. I've read a little bit of Stalin, and I know that there's a lot of things not told correctly in our daily lives and whatnot, especially in this country. So it's good to see like-minded people here since I've been back in the U.S. I'm glad to be a part of it.
It's incredibly refreshing to be a part of a party that's not ashamed of Comrade Stalin, that doesn't tuck him under the rug, and actually is committed to scientific Marxism, because the PSL, organizations like that claim to be Marxist-Leninist, it's so silly to me to erase such an important part of our history like that. So it's incredibly refreshing and optimistic to be a part of a party that's fully committed to that.
Thank you, comrade.
As someone who was previously a member of the Texas National Guard, the sheer contrast between that organization is indescribable. This is exactly the kind of party I was looking for.
I think that having compassion and having love is one of the most essential things about being a communist, at least for me. A love for my class, a love for humanity in general. And unfortunately, the only way that we're going to build that is the fact of the matter that it will be difficult, as all revolutions are, but it's to build a new world for love, for the fondness of humanity. And then I also wanted to say how frustrated I am every time I learn more about Stalin, about how dirty history has done him. Absolutely everything I've learned since I was a little girl. Nonsense, completely false. And what I don't understand is why Stalin particularly? Why is there such a obsession with painting Stalin as the equivalent to Hitler? I mean, I know that Khrushchev wasn't that helpful. It just bothers me so much.
What we had in Eastern Europe after World War II, it was the house that Comrade Stalin built. Let's be honest. It was the house that Stalin built. And everyone wanted to take that house down. From the Trotskyites to the Maoists, of all things, that's the ironic thing. The Maoists, who claim to be the real Stalinists. Think about that. They claim to be the real Stalinists, yet they were in the forefront. They were in the forefront, along with the Trotskyites and the anarchists, and the Social Democrats, all marching together in one orchestra, and the Zionists. Don't forget the Zionists, throw them in there. And they all wanted one head, and that was Comrade Stalin said. So it shows you that's the reason why they were all after him. It was only under Comrade Stalin's rule that the communist movement was united. Think about that. We were the most powerful force on this planet. I don't know if people realize that.
Question about other parties' reluctance to talk about Stalin, or I even heard some bash Lenin. Is there an element of them feeling that there's some personal risk there because of the hostile attitude that governments and people have taken towards the Bolshevik program? And is the party trying to dissipate that fear?
I was told by the people from these other groups that they didn't want to use the word communist. Think of the names of these groups. Freedom Road Socialist Organization, FRIZO. Freedom Road Socialist Organization. PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. Workers' World Party. American Party of Labor. Think of the names of all these groups on the left. Not one has the courage to use the word communist. And the reason is they tell me, we don't want to spend time fighting these anti-communists. We want to take where the young people are at. They're frustrated with capitalism, and we want to go on from there. So I think it's a form of opportunism, comrades. That's the difference. We say, no matter which way you turn, the word communist is going to come up. The famous cartoon by a guy by the name of Wright. He has cops clubbing workers that are on strike. This is a cartoon. He's clubbing them. And one worker tells the cop, "But I'm an anti-communist." And the intelligent cop says, "I don't give a damn what kind of communist you are." And he hits him on the head with the baton again. And that's exactly it. You put the word communist, any kind of communist, and you have it in the name, these people look at it as an albatross. The OCP, a woman who was their treasurer at the time, told me in 1991, after the end came, she said, "Thank God." This is her. She was a communist for a red diaper baby. And she said, "Thank God we don't have to worry about the hammer and sickle anymore. It was an albatross around my neck." That's what she said. And they were happy that that happened in the Soviet Union. That's where the CP is coming from.
I have asked 10 different members of PSL, and 10 different members of PSL have given me the same response to, why don't you talk about Stalin? Why don't you allow the hammer and sickle at your protests? Why don't you talk about the Soviet Union more? They say, we don't want to scare away people. Why are you so hung up on Stalin? The word communist scares people away.
One thing that stood out to me when reading this, and I think this may go away to explaining why Stalin in particular is vilified and hated, whereas Khrushchev will actually usually get halfway decent, friendly article written about him on historical works. There's a passage when he was talking about what we wanted the party to be. Do we want the party to just be full of a few people who have mastered the program according to some arbitrary definition and no one else, where the decisions of the party are kept away and where a tiny elite few rule the party instead of the masses? Or do we want to open it up to people who are interested and people who are working to reach that level and who want to work to achieve something far greater than what they had? What the party represented under Stalin was the masses, the workers, will lead this party. We will listen to them. We will respond to them. That is what led to their success, and that is why they hate him so much, because that is what will lead to another revolution.
A quote from Comrade Stalin. This is the quote. "Leaders come and go, but the people remain." Remember that quote. Keep it in your minds. Leaders come and go, but the people remain.
This notion of Stalin as the bureaucrat came from, and also the party purges as being one of the things that he's most guilty of. Where did that notion come from? Is it a conspiracy theory, much in the same way that people who wrote about the famine in Ukraine was created?
It came originally from Trotsky and then Khrushchev. After Khrushchev's secret speech in 1956, after all of this was released to the public, Khrushchev had this big thing where there was this idea that Stalin and a bunch of other people like Andrei Andreev, Lazar Kaganovich, and Molotov, all of them were part of this big conspiracy against the party, against the old Bolsheviks, to kill all of them. That's where it came from.
When I tell people I'm a communist, I feel a lot of pride in saying so. And whenever people ask me about the party that I do work in, I feel a lot of pride when I say the Party of Communists USA. I never shy away from the name when anybody asks me.
What Angelo said earlier about a passion for our ideology and compassion for our comrades, we don't do that just out of liberalism, out of a commitment to an ideal. We do that because it's actually the thing that works the best as well for winning people over, for keeping them, and for also helping them become better revolutionaries. It may seem like the right thing to do in the near term to be very hard-nosed about these things, but that's alienating to people en masse, and it's the masses that we need to find support with. And remember, we're trying to contrast ourselves with a heartless world. a world dominated by capital that cares nothing for you and I. So if we're going to be anti-capitalist, it means we also have to be antithetical to that sort of thing too, by our example.
That's right, comrade. Very good. Thank you.
About Stalin being terrible and bad and everything, and every time we hear stuff like that, I feel like it's capitalist projection of what's bad. When we hear about Stalin being a bureaucrat and all these other things, it's capitalism projecting all of its terrible attributes onto socialism and saying, oh yeah, well look, that's socialism. So whenever you hear a capitalist crapping on socialism, you should keep that in mind and look back and say, well, isn't that capitalism?
The best part of tonight's class, in my opinion, was the new people. Every time we have a class, I hear the new people. I want to know why people are coming to the party. And it's so refreshing. Remember, I haven't been a newbie for 60 years. I was a newbie when I was 13. And all I have to look forward to for the last 60 years is help recruit people into the party and find out why they're coming to us. So that, for me, is an incentive. It's a reinforcement to know that what we're doing is correct and what other groups are doing is incorrect. And what the capitalists are doing is incorrect. The way they treat people. The best book I found out is in New Outlook Publishers. It's called Why Communism? When was the last time you heard anybody in the left, other than us, talk about communism in the future? None of them do, comrade. It's not even on their agenda. It's not on their radar, that word. They don't give a damn. They're just as anti-communist as the people on the right. I'm really sick of those people, especially the old CP. Why do they call themselves communists? They are anti-communist, that party. To the hilt, they're anti-communist, and they should be attacked as such, in my opinion, on any media. They're the worst. The other ones don't even try to be communist. But the old party, they mislead, they lie, they're mischievous, they're money grubbers. Everybody here should know they invest all their money in the stock market. That is a fact. They've been doing that since 1992 when I was a member. They were proud of it when the stock market was doing better under Bill Clinton. They started to put their money in the stock market, and they're proud of it. How could any communist talk about the stock market as favorable, whether they're in Beijing, I'll tell you that right now, or whether they're in Petrograd, which is St. Petersburg, or whether they're in New York City? Wall Street, the stock market, is our enemy, comrades. It is not our friend in any way. It will never be our friend. So the worst criminals in our movement are the old CPUSA, and we have to fight them every day because they are lying to what the word communism means, and they don't give a damn about communism in the future. And that's all I want to say. I want to thank everybody for expressing their opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this full-length class from the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. For more information, or if you're interested in attending classes, visit our website, check out our YouTube channel, or email info@psmls.org.